The cowboy who never opened his front door froze when a smoke-covered stranger looked into his eyes and asked only 6 quiet words. "Can I stay a while?" The cabin door creaked as sparks drifted through the cold Wyoming night. Smoke clung to her dress. His coat rested on her shoulders, and somewhere behind them timber cracked inside the burning shop. He never stepped aside. She never looked away. What was he protecting? And what had she already seen? Tell us what you think before the story begins. Smoke drifted through the Wyoming night like a gray ribbon, twisting beneath the stars. Ada Voss stood on the narrow porch of a lonely cabin, with soot across one sleeve of her brown traveling dress. Eli Morrow's heavy canvas coat rested over her shoulders, carrying the faint scent of leather, pine smoke, and horse sweat. Behind them, beyond the cottonwoods, an orange glow pulsed against the darkness where the rear wall of her dressmaking shop still smoldered. Eli held the cabin door half open. His broad hand gripped the weathered wood so tightly his knuckles turned pale beneath the lantern light. He had charged into a burning building without hesitation. Yet now he seemed unable to move a single step. Ada looked past him into the quiet cabin. A small table, one lamp, one coffee cup waiting beside a cold stove. She lowered her voice. "Can I stay a while?" The words floated into the silence. Eli's jaw tightened. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods. Somewhere down near the creek, water slipped over smooth stones. He said nothing. The lantern flickered. Weeks earlier, autumn arrived slowly in Clearwater, Wyoming territory. Morning frost silvered the wagon ruts before sunrise, but by afternoon, the streets filled again with cattle dust carried in from the surrounding ranches. Freight wagons rolled over warped boardwalks. Blacksmith hammers echoed from open shop doors. Horses stamped beside hitching rails while men argued over feed prices outside Henderson's general store. Eli Morrow noticed none of it. Every morning before daylight, he crossed the same stretch of road toward the livery. Every evening he returned by the same trail that followed the creek toward his cabin. No detours, no visits, no supper invitations accepted. The people of Clearwater had long ago stopped asking. At 32, Eli was known across 3 counties as the finest horse trainer anyone could hire. Ranchers trusted him with animals other men called impossible. He never raised his voice, never reached for a whip unless safety demanded it. He waited. Patience, he believed, could calm almost anything. Almost. That morning, a young bay gelding fought every inch of the corral rope. Its eyes rolled white. Its breathing came fast. Stable hands backed away. "He's gonna kick through the fence," one muttered. Eli stepped into the pen alone. He did not grab the rope tighter. He simply stood, his shoulders relaxed, his eyes lowered. Minute after minute passed while dust drifted between them. The horse's breathing slowly matched his own. Its ears tipped forward. One cautious step, then another. Finally, the frightened animal stretched its nose toward Eli's waiting hand. Only then did Eli touch its neck. "That's all," he said quietly. The men watching shook their heads with admiration. "You ought to teach people the same way." A few laughed. Eli only opened the gate and walked away before anyone could continue the conversation. His cabin stood nearly a mile outside town beside a shallow creek lined with cottonwoods already turning gold. He had built it board by board with his own hands. Sarah had chosen the window that faced west. She said the mountains looked softer at sunset. 3 years had passed since she and their unborn child died during a bitter winter. Nothing inside the cabin had changed since. One plate rested on the shelf. One coffee cup hung beside the stove. One bed waited beneath a folded quilt. Beside the western window sat a rocking chair hidden beneath a white cotton sheet. Dust settled everywhere else. Never there. Eli cleaned the cabin every Saturday. He polished the stove, swept the floor, sharpened his tools, but he never lifted the cloth. When evening winds pushed gently against the walls, every board creaked except that silent chair. The following afternoon, The stagecoach rattled into Clearwater beneath a cloud of yellow dust. Passengers climbed down stiff-legged from the long journey. Last came a young woman carrying herself with quiet purpose. Ada Voss stepped onto the boardwalk wearing a practical brown dress and sturdy boots that had seen too many miles to still be fashionable. One large trunk followed behind her. A wooden case protected her sewing machine. Several conversations paused, not because she asked for attention, because she did not. She thanked the driver, straightened her gloves, and walked directly toward Henderson's general store. Mr. Henderson looked up from his ledger. "Can I help you, miss? I'm looking for the empty storefront that used to be the barber shop." "The one across the street?" "Yes, sir." "You planning to rent it?" "I'm planning to work in it." He studied her for a moment before smiling. "Then we'd better find you the key." By sunset, the old barber shop smelled of soap instead of stale hair tonic. Ada swept until blisters formed across her palms. She washed every dusty window. She patched a torn curtain. Before darkness settled over Clearwater, she nailed a freshly painted sign above the doorway. Ada Voss, dressmaking and mending. The next morning, the blacksmith's wife carried in a torn work dress. Ada repaired it so neatly, the stitches almost disappeared. By week's end, 2 more dresses followed. Word spread quietly. The new seamstress knew her trade. Late that afternoon, Ada carried a bundle beneath one arm while walking toward the livery. She stopped beside the corral. The same cowboy from the day before stood brushing the bay gelding beneath the fading light. Neither horse nor man seemed eager for company. Ada waited until he finished. Then she stepped closer. "I wondered if you might look at something." Eli turned. She unfolded a thick wool blanket whose leather binding had pulled away from one edge. "You mend harness," she said. "Your stitching looks stronger than mine." Eli studied the blanket, then the woman holding it. Finally, he nodded once. "Leave it." "No more, no less." Ada smiled softly. "I appreciate it." She walked away without asking another question. Eli watched her only long enough to see the blue curtain hanging inside the new shop sway gently as she disappeared through its doorway. Then he looked back at the blanket resting across the fence. For reasons he could not explain, he repaired it before touching any other work waiting in the stable. Ada returned 7 days later, just after noon. The livery smelled of hay, saddle soap, and damp wool. A gray sky pressed low over Clearwater, and the first cold wind of the season pushed dust along the boardwalk in thin, restless lines. Her blanket waited on a clean bale near Eli's workbench. The torn leather edge had been replaced and stitched down in narrow, even rows. Ada ran her fingertips over the repair. "You did fine work." Eli kept his attention on a bridle buckle. "It'll hold." She reached into the basket on her arm and placed a parcel wrapped in a flour sack beside his tools. "I brought payment. I said I didn't need any. It isn't money." That made him look. Warmth still gathered beneath the cloth. "Bread," she said. "Sourdough." His expression changed so quickly Ada almost missed it. The last loaf carried into his workplace had come from Sarah. She had set it beside the anvil with butter wrapped in waxed paper and laughed when he tried to refuse it. Eli pushed the memory down. "I don't need it." Ada did not withdraw the parcel. "Everyone needs bread." She picked up her blanket and left. Eli stood alone while the stable boys worked at the far end of the barn. He considered calling her back, considered giving the loaf to them. Instead, near sundown, he tucked it beneath his coat and carried it home. The cabin was cold. He set the bread beside the stove, fed kindling beneath the grate, then unwrapped the parcel while the fire caught. The crust was browned unevenly, with a split along the top where steam had escaped. He tore off a piece. The first bite was still soft in the middle. Its warmth filled his mouth. Then the room. then something deeper he had kept shut for so long he had nearly forgotten it existed. His eyes moved to the chair beside the western window. The white sheet remained smooth and untouched. For the first time in 3 years, the cabin did not feel entirely empty. That frightened him more than the emptiness ever had. The next morning, Eli took his usual road into town. When Ada's blue curtain came into view, he slowed without meaning to. She stood behind the glass, bent over a length of dark green cloth. Morning light caught the side of her face. Her sewing machine moved beneath one steady hand while the other guided the fabric. Ada looked up. Eli turned toward the hitching rail as if examining a loose post. By the time he entered Henderson's store, Mr. Henderson was smiling behind the counter. "Something wrong with that rail?" "No. You studied it like you meant to marry it." Eli set coffee, flour, and bacon on the counter. "Add another pound of flour." Mr. Henderson glanced at the order, then at him. "Expecting company?" "No." The answer came too quickly. A few days later, Ada appeared at the livery with a canvas satchel whose strap had split at the buckle. Eli repaired it that afternoon. When she collected it, she left a jar of apple preserves. The next week, she asked how to keep rain from seeping through the seams of a winter traveling cloak. Eli showed her how to warm beeswax and work it into the cloth with the back of a spoon. 2 newspapers appeared beside his tools the following morning. Neither of them named the pattern. Still, Eli began finding reasons to pass her shop after closing time. Sometimes Ada remained at her sewing table while he sat on the front step repairing a halter. The scissors made a soft, regular sound. Leather creaked beneath his fingers. Her little stove ticked as it cooled. They spoke only when there was something worth saying. One evening, Ada brought him coffee in a white cup with a thin blue line around the rim. He accepted it while she was still standing there. That small act seemed to surprise them both. A mountain wind came down after midnight 3 days later and tore one shutter from Ada's shop. At dawn, she found Eli outside with a brace bit, 2 fresh screws, and a hinge taken from the livery's spare hardware box. "Who told you?" she asked. "Heard it banging." "From the livery?" He looked toward the street. Ada knew the distance was too great. She said nothing more. Instead, she brought him coffee. This time, when their fingers touched around the cup, Eli did not pull away at once. Later that week, Ada noticed a tear at his shirt cuff. "That will catch on a buckle," she said. "It's fine." "It isn't." He hesitated before removing the shirt from beneath his coat and handing it over from behind the tack room door. When Ada returned it, the repair was nearly invisible. Inside the cuff, she had sewn a strip of softer cloth so the rough seam would not scrape his wrist. Eli discovered it that night. He sat beside the stove, turning the cuff between his fingers. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods. Inside, the covered chair waited in silence. But the silence had changed. It no longer felt dead. It felt as though someone had knocked softly from the other side of it. Eli did not answer. Not then. For the next several days, he kept working as though nothing had shifted. He trained horses before sunrise, repaired harness after supper, and took the long road home beneath the cottonwoods. But Ada had begun appearing in the quiet spaces of his day. A jar on the shelf, a softer seam against his wrist, a blue curtain moving across the street. One evening he passed her shop and saw a traveling dry goods salesman leaning over the counter. The man wore a polished vest and talked with both hands while Ada examined a sample book. Eli stopped across the road. Ada looked up and smiled when she saw him. He turned away before she could lift a hand. At the livery, a young stallion shied while Eli tightened a cinch. He pulled too sharply. The horse jerked backward, eyes wide. Eli released the strap at once. "Easy," he murmured, though he was speaking more to himself. That Sunday he rode to the churchyard. Sarah's grave stood beneath a bare elm, its stone darkened by wind and winter. Eli cleared yellow leaves from the carved letters and sat on his heels in the cold grass. He tried to remember the exact sound of her laugh. He pictured Ada passing him coffee in the white cup with the blue rim. The preacher came along the path carrying a rake. He stopped several feet away. "Cold morning." Eli nodded. The preacher looked toward Sarah's stone, then toward the mountains. Remembering the dead and joining them are not the same thing. Eli rose without answering. 2 nights later, the wind came down hard from the Bighorn country. It struck Clearwater in long, violent gusts. Roof tin rattled, hitching rails groaned, horses kicked at stall doors while dust and rain swept together across the street. Eli helped secure the livery, then saw Ada's sign tear loose and swing from one chain. He ran through the storm. Rain had pushed through the rear wall of her shop. Water streamed across the floor toward the sewing machine. Ada was dragging bolts of cloth onto the counter when Eli entered. "Take the machine," she said. "You take the ledger." They worked without argument. Eli lifted the sewing machine onto a dry crate. Ada bundled wet calico beneath canvas. Together they climbed a ladder and fastened a tarp over the damaged roof while the wind snapped it like a sail. Ada's boot slipped on the wet boardwalk. Eli caught her around the waist. For one breath, she rested against him, Solan shone on her lashes. His hand remained at her back. Neither spoke. Then Ada stepped away and gathered the fallen nails. After midnight, the worst of the storm moved east. Ada lit her stove and set 2 coffee cups on the table. Eli watched her make room for his without asking whether he would stay. For one dangerous moment, he saw the same cup in his cabin. Ada near the western window. 2 plates on the table. Sarah's chair uncovered. The thought came warm and whole. Then guilt struck. Eli set down the cup. "I should check the horses. The storm has passed. They'll still need settling." He left before Ada could answer. At home, he sat at his workbench until the lamp burned low. A block of cottonwood lay among his tools. Eli picked up his knife and began carving. First the curve of a neck, then 2 small ears. By dawn, a mare had begun to emerge from the wood. He hid it beneath a folded cloth before leaving for the livery. The following evening, the temperature dropped below freezing. Ada remained at her shop, finishing a winter coat promised to a rancher's wife before morning. She fed another piece of split pine into the iron stove and bent over the sleeve. A gust struck the building. The stovepipe shifted with a dull metallic scrape. Ada looked up. A thin line of smoke curled from behind the rear shelving. She crossed the room quickly, but sparks had already caught in the dry wall lining. Flame rose behind the fabric bolts. The brass bell over the door began ringing wildly as heat twisted the frame. Ada seized her order ledger and pattern book. Smoke thickened. A shelf crashed across the rear aisle. Outside, Eli saw the orange light from the livery. He grabbed an axe and ran. By the time he reached the shop, townspeople were shouting for water. Ada's silhouette moved behind the front window. Eli smashed the glass with the axe handle and climbed through. "Ada!" She coughed beside the fallen shelf, clutching the ledger against her chest. "My machine!" He lifted her before she could argue. She struck his shoulder once, reaching back toward the room. "Eli, the machine!" "You first!" He carried her through the broken window and set her on the boardwalk. Then he went back inside with 2 men from the blacksmith shop. They dragged the sewing machine clear while a bucket line formed from the public pump. Water hissed against the walls. Smoke rolled beneath the roof. The shop survived. The rear room did not. Near midnight, frost began forming along the broken window frame. Ada stood beneath a borrowed blanket, staring at the blackened boards and soaked cloth piled in the street. Mr. Henderson offered space in his storeroom for what could be saved. The hotel was full of freight drivers stranded by the storm. Ada said she would sleep in the front room. Eli looked at the shattered glass and open roof. "No, I have a stove." "You had a stove. I can manage." "No." The word came harder than he intended. Ada looked at him. Eli took off his canvas coat and placed it around her shoulders. "My cabin is dry." The ride out of Clearwater passed in silence. Ida sat behind him beneath a sky sharpened by cold. The moon silvered the road, the creek, and the cottonwoods surrounding the cabin. Eli dismounted first. He reached the porch and opened the door. Then he stopped. The man who had entered a burning shop without hesitation stood frozen before his own threshold. Ada saw the lamp inside, the single cup, the white-covered chair beside the western window. Smoke still clung to her dress. She tightened his coat around her shoulders and asked quietly, "Can I stay a while?" Eli's hand closed around the edge of the door. For a long moment, the only sound was the creak moving through the darkness. Then, at last, he stepped aside. Ada entered without brushing against him. The cabin was warmer than the porch, though barely. A low fire glowed behind the stove grate. One straight-backed chair stood near the table. Beside the western window, the rocking chair remained beneath its white cotton covering. Ada looked at it only once. She removed Eli's coat, folded it carefully, and placed it over the straight chair. Then she sat there rather than crossing toward the rocker. Eli noticed. He set another piece of wood in the stove and brought out his only spare blanket. "You take the bed. And you?" "The barn. It is freezing. I've slept in worse." Ada did not argue while he was inside. She waited until the cabin door closed behind him. 20 minutes later, she found him seated on the chopping block beneath the barn eave, a blanket pulled around his shoulders. His breath showed white in the moonlight. She carried a tin cup. "I found your coffee. You should be resting." "So should you." Ada set the cup beside him and remained standing until he took it. The warmth passed through the tin into his hands. After a long silence, Eli looked toward the cabin window. "Her name was Sarah." Ada said nothing. "She died 3 winters ago." His voice thinned on the next words. "The baby did too." Ada lowered herself onto the edge of the porch, leaving space between them. Sarah must have been deeply loved. Eli stared into the dark field. She offered no promise that time would heal him, no claim that the loss had happened for a reason. She simply sat beside him while the coffee cooled. Near dawn, Ada returned to the cabin and found flour, salt, and a small crock of sourdough starter she had carried from the fire. She mixed biscuits in Eli's dented tin bowl. The smell of baking bread filled the room. Eli stood near the door, watching her move between the table and stove. She touched nothing without asking. She made no attempt to uncover the chair. For one reckless moment, he nearly told her she could remain until the shop was repaired. Instead, he said, "The road should be clear by noon." Ada's hands paused over the biscuit pan. Then she nodded. "All right." During the following week, Eli repaired the burned rear wall of her shop. He fitted a new stovepipe, replaced 2 shelves, and boarded the broken window until glass could arrive on the freight wagon. Ada held boards steady and sorted square nails into an apron pocket. Their fingers met more than once. Each time Eli withdrew sooner. When the work was finished, he stopped sitting on her front step. He passed the blue curtain without slowing. If Ada entered the livery, he found some task in the farthest stall. She gave him 4 days. On the 5th, she carried his repaired shirt to the corral. Eli was brushing the bay gelding. "I brought this back. Leave it on the fence." Ada laid the folded shirt across the top rail, but did not walk away. "Why do you keep doing this?" he asked. "Doing what?" "Finding reasons to come near me." Ada's expression remained calm, though her fingers tightened around the basket handle. "Because you looked like you could use some company." Eli turned toward her. "I am not asking to replace Sarah," Ada continued. "I am asking whether I may stay long enough to know you." The horse shifted behind him. Eli heard the kindness in her voice and mistook it for danger. "Sarah is all the company I need." Ada looked past him toward the empty road. When she faced him again, something gentle had closed behind her eyes. Then I will stop asking you to accept what you have already chosen to refuse. She left the shirt on the fence. This time she carried the basket home. That afternoon, a trail boss named Wade Mercer rode into Clearwater looking for experienced men. A large herd needed moving north through the Powder River country before deep winter closed the route. Eli accepted before Wade finished naming the wages. The livery owner leaned against the stall door. You coming back? Someone else can handle the winter horses? That wasn't what I asked. Eli tightened the strap on his bedroll. He gave no answer. Ada learned of his departure from Mr. Henderson while paying for replacement thread. She signed the receipt, folded it once, and placed it in her purse. When does he leave? She asked. Before daylight. Ada nodded, as though the matter concerned weather. Eli spent his final night at the cabin with the cottonwood mare in his hands. He carved the legs thinner, shaped the ears, and sanded the back until no splinter remained. Near midnight, his knife slipped and left a shallow mark beneath the belly. He almost threw the horse into the stove. Instead, he rubbed beeswax into the wood and polished it with the soft lining Ada had sewn into his cuff. Before dawn, he rode to her shop. The street was empty. Frost silvered the boardwalk. Ada's repaired window stood open a finger's width to let the stove's heat escape. Eli lifted the sash and placed the wooden mare on her sewing table. He left no note. Any honest sentence would have made it harder to ride away. Ada woke to hoofbeats fading north. She reached the street wearing only her work dress and shawl, but the road held nothing except pale dust settling beyond the last buildings. Inside, morning light rested across the carved horse. Ada held it in both hands. The tenderness of the work hurt more than his silence. She placed the mare on the shelf above her sewing table. Later, when Mr. Henderson asked whether Eli would return, Ada threaded a needle before answering. A man who means to come back usually finds the courage to say so. Then she lowered her head and went on working. Winter settled over Clearwater one careful day at a time. The cottonwoods surrendered their last leaves. Frost lingered on hitching rails until noon. Smoke rose from every chimney in town, drifting across the streets before disappearing toward the Bighorn Mountains. Ada worked beneath the little wooden horse. She had placed it on the shelf above her sewing table, where morning sunlight reached it first. Customers sometimes admired the carving, asking who had made it. Ada always answered the same way. A good hand with wood. Nothing more. She accepted every repair that came through her door. Ranch coats with torn elbows, canvas wagon covers split by wind, church dresses needing longer hems for growing daughters, heavy saddle blankets worn thin along the edges. Each receipt she folded neatly into a ledger. Every payment, no matter how small, went toward replacing the cloth lost in the fire and settling Mr. Henderson's account before winter deepened. The work left little time for loneliness. Even so, loneliness arrived after dark. When she closed the shutters and banked the stove, Ada sometimes lifted the wooden mare from its shelf. One evening she noticed a tiny knife mark beneath its belly. His hand had slipped. The flaw was so small another person would never have seen it. Ada rested her thumb against the shallow cut. The imperfection reminded her that Eli had not carved the horse quickly. He had stayed with it after making a mistake. She set it back before anyone could knock at the door. The town, meanwhile, continued talking. Some believed Eli had ridden away because Ada expected too much from him. Others insisted he had never intended to remain in Clearwater at all. One customer finally asked the question everyone else had been circling. You waiting for that cowboy? Ada kept guiding dark thread through thick wool. No. The woman looked surprised. I'm working. The answer traveled through town almost as quickly as the gossip itself. People gradually stopped asking. Late one afternoon, a traveling dry goods merchant stepped inside the shop. His coat was trimmed with beaver fur, and polished samples of imported cloth filled 2 leather cases. He examined the smoke stains still visible on one rear beam. "You've recovered better than expected. I've been fortunate. You've been stubborn." He smiled as though it were praise. "I own a larger shop in Cheyenne. I could use someone with your skill, regular wages, a furnished room upstairs, better inventory than this town could ever offer." Ada looked around her little shop. The walls still carried the faint scent of fresh pine where Eli had rebuilt them. Outside the front window stood the hitching rail where ranch wives tied their horses every Saturday. "I appreciate the offer. You need an answer today." "When?" "Within the month." He handed her a folded card. 30 days. After he left, Ada slipped the card into her ledger without reading it again. Far north of Clearwater, Eli rode beneath a sky that seemed to grow larger every mile. The cattle trail crossed frozen creeks and open prairie where the wind never seemed to rest. Dust coated every blanket and saddle. Coffee tasted of smoke in tin cups. He volunteered for the longest night watches. When other riders slept, he circled the herd beneath stars sharp enough to cut the darkness. He had believed distance would quiet his thoughts. Instead, every campfire reminded him of Ada's little stove. Every loaf baked in a Dutch oven reminded him of the warm parcel she had left beside his tools. Even the silence betrayed him. Back home, silence had carried Sarah's memory. Out here, it carried Uda's absence. He finally understood the difference. One was grief. The other was a future he had walked away from with his own hands. 3 weeks into the drive, black clouds gathered over the Powder River country. Lightning split the horizon after sunset. The first crack sent hundreds of cattle surging forward at once. "Stampede!" men shouted into the dark. Rifles fired into the air. Horses lunged through flying dust and sleet. Eli forced his mount alongside the lead cattle, trying to turn them away from a narrow ravine hidden beyond the rain. His horse stumbled. For one terrifying heartbeat, the ground vanished beneath them. The roar of hooves shook through his chest. He thought he was about to die. And in that instant, he did not see Sarah. He saw Ada standing in the doorway of her little shop. He saw her holding out warm bread. He heard her quiet voice asking one simple question. "Can I stay a while?" The answer came too late. He had wanted her to stay all along. He pulled hard on the reins. His horse found its footing. Together with the other riders, he turned the herd before it reached the ravine. Long after the cattle settled, Eli remained beside the dying campfire, unable to look away from the embers. The trail boss lowered himself onto a nearby log. "You leave something behind?" Eli stared into the fire. "A woman. You planning on finding her?" "I don't know if she'll still be there." The older man poked the fire with a stick. "A man can outrun a town." He looked at Eli. "He can't outrun the reason he left it." The flames settled lower. For the first time since riding away from Clearwater, Eli stopped wondering whether he should return. He began wondering whether he still deserved the chance. Maybe that's the hardest road any of us will ever travel. Not the miles across frozen prairie or the steep trails beneath the Bighorn Mountains, but the quiet distance between regret and the courage to come home. If you've ever pushed away someone who only wanted to stand beside you, if you've ever carried a memory so tightly that it left no room for tomorrow, then perhaps part of Eli's journey belongs to you as well. Ada never demanded that grief disappear. She never asked the past to be forgotten. She simply offered kindness, patience, and one honest question. In the end, Eli discovered that love doesn't ask us to erase those we've lost. It asks whether we're willing to keep living in a way that honors them. Perhaps that's what second chances truly are. Not a chance to rewrite yesterday, but an opportunity to answer differently when life quietly asks the same question again. I'd love to know what touched you most about Eli and Ada's story. Was there one moment that stayed with you after the final scene? Share it in the comments. Your thoughts may become the encouragement someone else needs today. If stories of quiet courage, enduring love, healing hearts, and the untamed American West speak to you. I hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting just beyond the next trail, and I'd be honored to share them with you.